Good day everyone, this is Joseph, and in this video I'm going to discuss text and discourse. For the intended learning outcomes of this discussion, first, demonstrate a deep knowledge of the relations between text and discourse. Second, discuss the context of literary discourse. And here are the contents of this topic. First, the nature of text. Second, the nature of discourse. Third, textual and contextual meaning. Fourth, the context of literary discourse. And lastly, the communicative situation in literary discourse. So let's start with the nature of text. When we think of a text, we typically think of a stretch of language, complete in itself and of some considerable extent. So we perceive text as a composition or a written work that uses a language that contains meanings and has a purpose in communication. For example, business letters, news reports, etc. Though that is the basic definition of text, it's another discussion when we define the units of language that are used in those texts, since they contain meanings depending on the usage of words and sentence formation, and the words and sentences mean as they are. For example, keep off the grass, keep left, keep out, danger, ramp ahead, slow, and exit. These words are short but as meaningful as they are. This means that these minimal texts imply communicative meaning given that these words are used in context. Hence, these words do not need to be lengthy and have structural patterns in order to communicate meaningfully. We recognize a piece of language as a text, not because of its length, but because of its location in a particular context. Therefore, the meaningfulness of a text does not necessarily need to be sizable when we make sense of it. But where should text depend on its meaning? So consider when you see a road sign, ramp ahead. When you are driving a car, you see or interpret this road sign as a warning that there is a small hump ahead. Therefore, you should be careful in your speed or you have to slow down. From this example, you make sense of this text not because of its length and structural pattern, but because of the particular setting or location where it is used. And if you are aware of the usage of this text in this particular setting, you know what's the intention or the intended message of that text. But let's say the same words or sign that is used in a different location. Let's say in a souvenir shop. You still know the original meaning, but it does not make sense in that particular context because it is dissociated from its original purpose, which is used for traffic control. Hence, you are not able to react to its original intention. Because the sign is devoid of its original usage or context, it might give different meanings or interpretations according to where it is used. A text is dependent on its use in an appropriate context. So we can only decipher the meaning of a text if they are used in its intended context. We can only make sense of it is used according to its purpose or intention. The nature of discourse. The meaning of a text does not come into being until it is actively employed in a context of use. This process of activation of a text by relating it to a context of use is what we call discourse. So in simpler words, discourse means the contextualization of a text in relation to how the readers or hearers reorganize or piece together the intended message of the writer of the speaker. So this process results in a communicative act or discourse. The text is the observable product of the writer's or speaker's discourse, which in turn must be seen as the process that has created it. Clearly, the observability of a text is a matter of degree. So this means that discourse is a product of communication stemming from the observable intended message of the writer or speaker made sense by the reader or hearer through the process of meaning making. Hence, meaning making only depends on the observable meanings in a text. In this process, contextualization is being utilized, and the readers and hearers often look for context clues in the form of signal or cue to reconstruct what the writer or speaker intended to convey. However, even though the reader or hearer is actively engaging in forming the meaning of the text, there's no assurance that the interpretation of the reader or the hearer is congruent with the intended meaning of the writer or speaker. Therefore, one might also say that the inference of discourse meaning is largely a matter of negotiation between the writer or speaker and reader or hearer in a contextualized social interaction. So this means that there is a degree of agreement between the writer and the reader or speaker and hearer to infer the meanings of a text during the contextualized social interaction. Hence, in discourse, both the speaker and hearer or writer and reader are active participants in the process. A text can be realized by any piece of language as long as it is found to record a meaningful discourse when it is related to a suitable context of use. So, in conclusion, a text can be composed in any language as long as it produces a meaningful discourse appropriate to the context in where it is used. Textual and contextual meaning. In order to derive a discourse from a text, we have to explore two different sides of meaning. On the one hand, the text's intrinsic linguistic or formal properties, its sounds, typography, vocabulary, grammar, and so on. And on the other hand, the extrinsic contextual factors which are taken to affect its linguistic meaning. So, discourse starts with deciphering the meanings of a text, and there are two methods to decipher it. First, understanding the internal features of the text through looking at the linguistic properties. And second, the external factors that influence the usage of internal linguistic features that eventually affect the meaning. Hence, the relevance of external contextual factors is that it implies something about why the writer or hearer uses such language and the meanings they infer. And these are the fields of linguistics that concern the meaning making, which are semantics and pragmatics. So these are the two interacting sides of meaning. So first we have semantics. It is the study of formal meanings as they are encoded in the language of text. That is independent of writers or speakers and readers, hearers set in a particular context. So basically, semantics is the field of linguistics that deals with meanings in languages. It is an empirical inquiry that determines what linguistic meaning is and how it arises. And the meanings of a text are not determined by the agreement of the writers and readers that are conveyed in a particular context. Hence, in semantics, the meanings of the text are determined by universal meanings of the units found in the text and how they relate to other units and to the structure itself. So, in simpler words, this refers to dictionary meanings. Next, pragmatics. It is concerned with the meaning of language in discourse, that is, when it is used in an appropriate context to achieve particular aims. So, on the other hand, pragmatics is the extension of semantics that deals with the implications of the contextual use of language in the discourse. This means that pragmatics is dependent on the context-appropriate meanings of the words and the social interaction of the participants in a discourse. Moreover, the intention of the participants adds layers to the contextual meanings of a text or discourse. As I have mentioned, pragmatics is an extension of semantics. It does not necessarily mean that it is alternative to the latter. Pragmatics actually complements the semantics because it is implied in the interaction of the semantic meanings found in the context. The external non-linguistic context is a very complex notion because it may include any number of text external features influencing the interpretation of a discourse. So the external non-linguistic context is complicated in decoding the meanings of a text because there are a lot of external factors you have to consider why a particular text emerged to that meaning. Hence, a text can be attributed to various interpretations depending on which factors or point of view you applied to in the decoding process. To manage understanding the discourse, here are some of the components of text external features. First, the text or genre. This refers to the type of written or spoken discourse that is categorized according to the purpose of the communicator. For example, an election poster, a sermon, or recipe or a manual. Next, its topic, purpose, and function. So this explains why such discourse started in the first place. Next, the immediate temporary and physical setting of the text. This refers to the location where the text or discourse is produced. Next, the text's wider social, cultural, and historical setting. So it is about the background of the text and the underlying phenomena and elements related to the social, cultural, and historical aspects. Next, identities, knowledge, emotions, abilities, beliefs, and assumptions of the writer or speaker and reader or hearer. So this refers to the qualities and characteristics of the active participants in a discourse, such as perceptions and worldviews can also affect the meanings in the discourse. Next, the relationship holding between the writer or speaker and reader or the hearer. So it talks about the social dynamics of the speaker that can also affect the perceptions of the text or discourse. And lastly, the association with other similar or related text types or intertextuality. So this refers to using references and making connections from other texts that can also add other layers to the meanings of the text. Through intertextuality, we can give more emphasis to the significant details in the text to widen our understanding of particular information in the text. The context of literary discourse. So we talk about text, context, and discourse, but how are they relevant to literary text? In principle, the process of discourse inferencing is the same for non-literary and literary text. For in either case, we have to bring about an interaction between the semantic meanings of the linguistic items of the text and the pragmatic meanings these items take on in a context. So, deciphering the meanings of the discourse of both non-literary and literary texts can have the same process as we have to study the relations and interchange of semantic meanings and pragmatic meanings of both types of text. However, the nature of the context of literary discourse is quite different from that of non-literary discourse in that it is dissociated from the immediacy of social contact. So this means that the dynamics in decoding the meanings of the discourse in non-literary text is different from the literary text. This is evident when we decode the meanings of a non-literary text. It is dependent and associated to the immediacy of social contact. In other words, non-literary text can be understood in the context of our everyday social practice, whereas literary text is not conveyed in the same manner. So the meaning of the literary text is self-enclosed, which means that it is isolated or confined from external associations of meaning. The discourse of daily social life is, of necessity, constantly aimed at the control, categorization, and abstraction of an endless variety of social institutions, relationships, and processes. So the usual purpose of discourse we use for everyday communication has something to do with the organization of society in general. Hence, members of society are bound to agreements on the kind of discourse and its meanings that we have to convey. This means that we are expected to conform and participate in a discourse that is understood by many. However, this does not prevent us from showing our individuality, and this can be done through literature. It is literature, and in a broad sense, all art, which can be said to potentially provide an outlet for these individualizing tendencies. In the case of literature, this escape exists because its discourse is divorced from the context of the social practice we have just described. So through literature, we will be able to express our individualities artistically and creatively. This is the kind of outlet that allows us to deviate from the norms and conventionalities in discourse. This means that discourse in literature is devoid of the contextual use embedded in the social practices that is convenient for understanding meanings. Therefore, literary discourse cannot be categorized according to social communication practices and does not offer alternative realities to the meanings we created and subscribe to as members of society. The meanings of literary discourse are indefinite, undetermined, unstable, and indeed often unsettling. So every time we try to infer a discourse from the same literary text, we are sure to find other meanings which again and again will refuse to be pinned down and may therefore open up refreshing perspectives in addition to our socialized certainties. Hence, we cannot conclude definite meanings when we decode literary discourses. We can interpret the same literary text in different methods and come up with different meanings. And the analysis and interpretations cannot be established as definite ones. The same literary text can be analyzed and interpreted differently. The communicative situation in literary discourse. A discourse is a context-bound act of communication verbalized in a text and waiting to be inferred from it. Such a communicative act is inherently an interpersonal activity between two parties, the first-person party at the addresser end of the process and the second-person party at the addressee end. So basically, discourse is a product of communication and is bound to be interpreted by the participants in the process. The communication process is done interactively between the addresser and the addressee. The addresser is the writer or speaker while the addressee is the reader or listener. These two parties are active communicators in the discourse. They may share the same context physically or not, but these two understand the context they are in. The possibility of sharing the same beliefs, background, perspectives, and worldview is highly probable. Even though they may differ, the tendency to meet together is highly possible as well as both are present in the reality. But in literature, the communicative situation is not so straightforward since, as we have argued, literary texts are disconnected from ordinary social practices. There is a disruption in the direct line of communication between the parties. So this means that literary texts are devoid of the usual way of conveying a discourse as they are dissociated from social norms. Hence, interpreting literary text is different from non-literary texts, and the participants in a discourse are set in different dimensions. Therefore, the communication process is not direct as the addresser may have different meanings in mind, and the addressee may have different interpretations. Or the person is speaking in the literary text may not represent the person who created the literary text. Thus, the first person pronoun does not represent the person who produced the text, but a persona within it. And so we cannot, as readers, converge on the writer's context, but only on that which is internally created in the text itself. So, the writer of a literary text is not necessarily the same as the person present in the text. The person inside the text is a persona within the text only and not the writer. Hence, we cannot decipher the meaning using the writer's context since what we only get is the person created within the text. And the context inside the text may manifest several interpretations or points of view. Okay, let's try to illustrate the nuances in interpreting the meanings of literary text with this poem. This poem is entitled Devonshire Street by John Bettyman. The heavy mahogany door with its wrought iron screen shuts, and the sound is rich, sympathetic, discreet. The sun still shines on this 18th century scene with Edwardian faience adornment, Devonshire Street. No hope, and the X-ray photographs under his arm confirm the message. His wife stands timidly by. The opposite brick-built house looks lofty and calm, its chimneys steady against the mackerel sky. No hope, and the iron knob of this palisade, so cold to the touch, is luckier now than he. O merciless hurrying Londoners, why was I made for the long and painful deathbed coming to me? She puts her fingers in his as loving and silly, at long past Kensington dances she used to do. It's cheaper to take the tube to Piccadilly, and then we can catch a 19th or 22. So, in the poem, there are three perspectives. First, the third person terms. Example, his arm, his wife, he or she. Next, the first person perspective. The first person pronoun is in the direct speech of the man in the lines 11 to 12, and the first person perspective of the wife in the lines 15 to 16. So, the third person omniscient is a point of view where the narrator knows all the thoughts, actions, and feelings of all characters, who is manifested in the use of third person pronouns. However, the position of the third person POV is not made explicit because of the presence of first person perspectives, the man and the wife. But here, the perspectives are presented differently since the man used direct speech while the wife used the plural pronoun we. The usage of direct speech by the man manifested in the use of the first person pronoun, which is I, which means there's interpersonal communication or internal dialogue. On the other hand, the wife is speaking of two different realities, the present and everyday life they can share and the dreadful agony of the future they cannot. Hence, the three perspectives here, the man, the wife, and the detached observer. So this may look simple, but the text is complicated as it uses complex details. The things described are linguistically realized by rather complex noun phrases, some of which are overloaded with adjectives and other types of modifying elements. So this means that the linguistic features present in the text imply the realities perceived by the POV. The heavy use of complex noun phrases and adjectives represents the situation or the perceived situation of the POV in the text. It should be noted that these complex structures in themselves are just linguistic features, which do not go beyond the status of textual data. But as suggested earlier, we take it that they are designed to have discourse significance and so to reflect perspectives. Okay, for example, the heavy mahogany door with its wrought iron screen. This 18th century scene with Edwardian faience adornment, Devonshire Street. The opposite brick-built house, its chimney steady against the mackerel sky. The iron knob of this palisade, so cold to the touch. So though these words are just expressions used by the POV, however, their relevance in the discourse must be counted out as they have a purpose. Why the POV describe their realities in that way. So there is a reason for using those words. It might not be significant for the detached observer, but it is meaningful for the POV of the man. So we can infer that the man is in that sentence because of the agony he implied in his choice of words. Hence, this implies the sad reality of the man. When he left the specialist surgery, he had heightened senses. Someone who is going to die may have become more sensitive. Thus, the descriptions of things using his senses are more detailed. So we can interpret that the feelings of the man were transferred to external objects by the way he described them. He realized the fragility of his own life and the human life in general. And this assignment of discourse significance might draw our attention back to the text and to other linguistic features. For example, there is another conspicuous pattern of linguistic structures in which nouns denoting lifeless objects function either as the subject of action verbs or as the subject of copular verbs linked with one or more adjectives denoting human features. So this means that the presence and choice of linguistic features are significant in interpreting meanings conveyed by the POV. In the case of the poem, the lifeless objects were treated as animated objects, such as giving them abilities. Okay, for example, the combination of subject and verbs such as the door shuts, the sun shines, and the X-ray photographs confirm. So the poem also depicts non-human objects with human-like abilities, such as chimneys look steady and the knob is luckier than he. Therefore, the linguistic pattern in the text portrays lifeless objects as active and sentient. In general, the poem suggests that there's continuity in accepting ordinary and accepted things even in the state of personal agony. In the context of the poem, we may construe these structures pragmatically as further indication that we are to infer the man's anxieties and insecurity from the way he perceives the things around him. So it is manifested in the way he perceives inanimate or lifeless objects surrounding him with life and human-like abilities. Moreover, it implies the active conscious mind of the man and his capacity to feel with heightened senses. By contrast, the ill-fated man is subject of only two verbs. Significantly, both times this is in a context where he is not in control of the situation. So it is demonstrated in the bitter words and in the poem. For example, in the iron knob of this palisade is luckier than now he is. In the emotional passive structure, such as, why was I made for the long and painful deathbed coming to me? So he realized his uncontrollable, helpless, and dreadful situation that could not be changed anymore. So the wife also feels the same way, as she could not do anything to stop the agony of the man. And again, this inferring of discourse significance might lead us back to the text to see what other textual features might support our interpretation. So notice that the tense of verbs used in the text is in the present tense. This indicates that the events in the poem are in the present and the feelings of the man are real and actual, here and now, and not in the distant past. So this gives the impression to the readers of the reality of the situation and shares the present context. Another textual feature which contributes to this effect is the frequent use of the definite article. For example, the door, the sound, the X-ray photographs, the message. The definite article would normally signify a contextual convergence. It specifies something the speaker and the person spoken to both know about. So the frequent use of definite articles signifies that the identity of the noun is known to both the addresser and the addressee. Though this does not guarantee that the sick man and the reader share the same feelings or experiences, it only shows the dominant perspective of the man and his intention to convey them to the readers. So in conclusion, literature is distinctive because its texts are closed off from normal external contextual connection, and this means that we need to infer possible contextual implications, including perspective or point of view from the textual features themselves. So although in non-literary texts we can decode meanings and interpretations outside of the text or external non-linguistic features that contribute to the entirety of the discourse, literary text is different. We can only interpret the meanings to what we see inside the text or the present linguistic features inside the text. So that's the end of my discussion. Thank you very much for watching the video, and here's my reference.